Okay, everyone, thank you very much for your patience. We'll go ahead and get started. First of all, good afternoon. I'd like to thank you guys for joining us today. My name is Kevin Aubrey, and I am the Marketing Communications Manager for Consilium One. So I'd like to thank you for joining the Migrations That Save Millions webinar from Consilium One and VMware. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the VMware vFabric platform. We're going to discuss some of the features and benefits of that platform, and then we're going to highlight a case study that showcases how we were able to boost performance and reduce costs for an enterprise corporation by performing a large-scale migration over to the vFabric platform. I'd like to also let you know that all of your phones have been muted to aid in the presentation. So if you have a question that comes up at any time during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and send that over to vFabric@consilium1.com, and we'll address it at the end of our presentation. So at this time, I'd like to begin the presentation by turning it over to Mark Luger, our Vice President of Emerging Technologies for Consilium One. So Mark, take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. So as Kevin said, my name is Mark Luger. I run the Emerging Technologies group here at Consilium One. That basically encompasses a lot of the newer technologies, so mobile, cloud, a lot of applications, business intelligence, stuff like that, and big data. And as one of the major cloud platforms, obviously vFabric and vSphere itself fall into that. Today we're going to talk about a specific use case, but I've tried to broaden it so that you can understand kind of what we do and around this program, around migrating applications off one platform to another. In this case, it's specific to Weblogic to vFabric, but obviously it could be from multiple things. Okay, so the agenda today, I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are, Consilium One. We're going to go a little bit into vFabric, what it is, what the components are, and what those components do. And then we're going to talk about the Obsolescence Program. So we call that, we're obsoleting one platform for another platform. So it's an Obsolescence Program. I'm going to give you some sample questionnaire that we do. So basically, as part of the program, there's a lot of scoping involved. These things tend to be multi-year if you're doing hundreds of applications. And so I just want to kind of show just an example of how we kind of kick that off. The program is going to be a little bit different for each customer based on the way they run IT, the way they interact with their business groups, and then depending on what industry they're in. Okay, and then as Kevin said, if you have any questions, go ahead and email during the presentation. Go ahead and email them to the email address you see on the screen, vFabric@consilium1.com. Kevin will then, at the end, open up the line, and then we'll be able to ask any questions, and he'll read off any of the questions that were asked during the presentation. Okay. So our background, we've been around for about 16 years. I'll go into the technologies we deal with, but we have international reach, specifically North and South America and Europe. But we do have the capabilities to move into Asia-Pac as well if we need to. And we have worked with outsourcing companies in places in Asia, India, China, places like that. Okay. So some of our skills and capabilities. So the ones we care about today the most are the emerging technologies, the program management, since migrating hundreds of applications tends to be a program, it's not just a single project. Tools. So obviously, a lot of the tooling and stuff that you need to be able to accomplish a program like that would be around the, development tools, architecture tools, QA tools, load testing tools, all those things that, the middleware would depend on you having to in order to scale it out. Okay, but you also notice we do a lot of data management, risk management, security especially in the government space, a lot of network architecture, infrastructure stuff. So vSphere and virtualization and cloud would fall under the infrastructure umbrella. And then operational technical support is really around managed services. So we can manage mobile devices, PCs, virtual desktops, stuff like that. Okay, so vFabric and cloud experience. EMC owns VMware, or 40% of them. So we are a delivery partner with both EMC and vFabric, or VMware. So we work with both of them on VMware projects. We've done over 70 vFabric consulting engagements over the last 2 years since we've been involved with our partnership. In that time, we've done over a dozen migrations, probably closer to 2 dozen. Those have consisted of, maybe a couple apps all the way up to, 700 apps. So the program we're developing is really for hundreds of apps. If you only have 2, maybe 5 apps to migrate, you're really talking about individual projects. You don't really need the overhead of a program at that point. We authored the original Tomcat and tcServer training classes for VMware. And then we deliver 5-day vFabric training classes a month as one of our practices. We have a training department. And that's in Tomcat, tcServer, Spring integration, and the rich web stuff. We also have several Gemfire experts in-house. And we'll talk more about what these components are in a second. We have a vFabric bootcamp for ramping up resources. So this is either our internal resources, or if your team needs to be ramped up on these resources, or if you're outsourcing, like to India or Ukraine or something, and you want to ramp up those people, you can send them all through our bootcamp. And we won the IaaS, which is the Internet as a Service Cloud Award from the U.S. government. So we're one of 12 awardees. 9 are left, and it looks like 6 will end up being left when all the security checks and stuff are done. So you can go ahead and check up that. But that was basically a 2-year process to win that. So we have a lot of experience in building out a cloud with both VMware technology and other technology. Okay, and then we're working with current customers right now on the new cloud and vSphere 5 offering. So helping customers build out their cloud and then migrate all their applications over to vFabric. So not only do we have the program that migrates these applications, creating an app factory, if you will, IT as a service, or any of these terms you want to use, but we also have experience building out the whole infrastructure with customers. And then we're a vSphere 4 certified infrastructure and managed services team. So we do a lot, dozens of engagements a year around the core vSphere stuff. So what is vFabric? So there's several pieces to it. We'll go into the Spring component. So there's a Spring programming model, which is probably the most popular. Comparatively, that's basically comparative to EJB in a way. EJB is probably a subset of what Spring can do. I've done a lot of stuff with EJB 3, having worked at JBoss when we were developing the spec. So we had the first commercial EJB 3 application there. And Spring, is a much more of a superset of that functionality. There's the rich web components that Spring has, so the Spring MVC, Dojo integration, Spring Flow, and some of these other components to create rich web components. There's social and mobile integration with things like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, but there's also integrations with things like Salesforce. There's a data access component that's called the data director. So for accessing data, there's Spring integration for doing integration type stuff. Okay, and then we'll go over the components that Weblogic has that compare to some of these things. The Spring Batch framework, which is really good for people moving from mainframes and who have batch frameworks set up in their mainframes. You can actually then just replicate kind of those jobs, so you don't really have to change your business processes so much, and yet you're still moving to a newer, more modern platform. For developers, there's a Spring tool suite that is built on Eclipse. So that's pretty good for doing all the configuration, setting up the beans and stuff like that. So it's a good tool. WaveMaker is an application builder. So it's kind of a drag and drop for building applications. My personal experience with it is for simple applications, for demoing stuff, it's pretty good. I have never had to build a commercial product with it though. And then there's a lot of the cloud services, like I said, like the Salesforce and some of these other things. On the web server side, you have the Apache web server, which they call the enterprise ready server. So it's and then you have tcServer. So tcServer and enterprise ready server are really just Apache and Tomcat with a bunch of manageability built in. And then with vSphere 5, they also have something called EM4J, which allows you to cluster the heap across machines. So the Java heap can be clustered now across multiple instances of the virtual machine. And then enterprise for the cloud messaging, you have RabbitMQ. For global data caches, this is a fantastic product. You have Gemfire. We won't go into detail about these products, but if you're looking for a global cache, that is a fantastic product. It's been around for about 10 years, and it's very well architected and scales globally across data centers, across geos. And then SQLfire is a SQL interface, ANSI SQL, to Gemfire, to your cache. And then for monitoring, you have Insight for monitoring the applications, and then you have Hyperic for monitoring the performance of those applications. Now, some of the cool things is, and we're going to talk about this in a second, you can actually use this with the new vSphere 5 and Cloud Director to spin up or spin down instances based on the current load and based on any rules you set up. Okay, so again, this is more about vFabric, but there are some, again, now with vSphere 5, there are some application hooks in here that it would be useful to know about if you're deciding to use vSphere. So first, the data director, as I told you. So this allows you to scale out databases, ramp up new instances of databases. So this provisioning, it's ramping down databases, load balancing databases, and it helps with data sharding and stuff like that. Right now, it supports the vFabric version of Postgres with other databases coming online soon. vApp is another thing, and you'll see right there it even has WebSphere, DB2, and stuff, because vApp is really just a wrapping component. It allows you to create an app that is a multi-tiered app. So typically when you have an app, it's a WAR or an EAR or something, but in reality, the app is, maybe there's a web server component, there's some security things you have to set up there, there's the application itself, the WAR or the EAR, so there's a bunch of, there's a database, so there's a bunch of different things that make up this app. And vApp is a way of actually packaging that up so you can then replicate it in other environments. So either, some of your test environments with vLabs, which I'll show you in a second, right here. So if you look over here on the right, you have VMware vCenter Lab Manager. So for instance, you can take the vApps and you can push these to here. So that's for training, but also for QA and load testing. You can bring up instances, do a bunch of QA against it, ramp down the instances, refresh the instances real easy. So it's a fantastic way of managing your QA and stuff like that. So, when you do a migration program like this, it's not only about just migrating code and applications. A lot of times it involves your infrastructure, it involves your QA, it involves security, procurement, legal, marketing. A lot of different teams have to be involved. There's a lot of stakeholders in a program like this, and you need to make sure everybody's on the same page and that they're taking advantage of some of these technologies. And then vCloud Director, again, that's just that allows you to create the clouds now, and it'll manage the resources and stuff with Hyperic and Insight. Okay, so some of the Spring Source components. So this is Spring specifically, which is a component within vFabric itself. But Spring, if you don't know about it, it's a programming framework. It's meant to simplify programming in Java. So they have interfaces to things. To give you a good example of this, Spring Data, which I don't even know if it's on this list, but Spring Data is actually a relatively new component. And what it does is allow you to do things like hibernate without having to use Hibernate specifically, so you can put another ORM, Object Relational Mapping tool in there. But it also allows you to do things like if you want to hit a MongoDB or Hadoop or something like that, not just SQL databases, but NoSQL databases, it'll actually allow you to do that as well from one interface. Now the nice thing about that is that you don't really have to understand a lot of the transactional stuff or non-transactional stuff you have to do. The programmers can just kind of program their data, their CRUD data, and Spring Data will take care of everything for them on the back end. It also means that if you want to, there's a lot of different NoSQL databases out there, and if you want to move from, like, say, a Mongo to a Reddit or something like that, you can, you can do that, depending on which one's going to win, because you don't, at this point, that market's kind of up for land grab. Okay, but you see a lot of the other components. There's a Spring IDE, LDAP, Spring Integration, Batch. There's an OSGI framework, which is also, you'll hear it called Blueprint, was something that they put in there. The Spring Security, which is the old CG stuff, which has been updated. Spring Web Services, Webflow, and then the core framework. BlazeDS is also, that's for all the Adobe stuff. That's kind of going away, but that, it's probably going to turn more into like an HTML5 type thing. Okay. And so now introduce you to the program that we have for migrating these, migrating off these platforms. Okay, so in this particular instance with this particular customer, they were looking to migrate identified apps that were on WebLogic to VMware. They also wanted to, Tomcat, as with Apache, are the most popular servers in their category worldwide. So there's way more Tomcat than anything else out there. So adding tcServer just adds support to this, and it adds manageability. And so that's definitely a goal of a lot of customers, is to take these Tomcat servers they have and upgrade them to the latest. Make sure they get the ones that are load tested, performance tested, and get some support for configuration help and training and stuff like that. Okay. Eliminate the proprietary licensing subscription cost. So that's all, that's a pretty high cost. If you have hundreds or thousands of servers, that can definitely be millions of dollars. So you want to eliminate that. vFabric is 1/9. The last pricing I saw was about 1/9 the price of, say, a WebLogic. So much, much cheaper. They want to obtain support for their Tomcat instances, reduce the quantity and cost of hardware infrastructure. So again, part of this program that we did for this customer was also to do, set up the virtualization stuff. And this program's been going on for several years, so it's kind of before cloud really took off, which, like the vSphere 5 stuff. And then everybody wants, so again, when you're doing these programs, it's not just about the application maintenance or development. It also involves QA, security, your infrastructure teams, and just basically your whole environment. And so they take a lot of customers take an opportunity to actually improve all their processes while they do this. Now, some of the other goals that other customers have said to us, reducing operational costs is a big one. So again, you can do that through both the vFabric stuff and the vSphere stuff. Improve workforce productivity and efficiency. Basically, a lot of the old. So if you've done a lot of purchases of other companies, or just over time, you'll tend to have a lot of different environments. You may have a lot of different types of web servers, application servers. Some people are .NET and Java mix. Some people have PHP, Ruby on Rails. They have a lot of these different things. And so what ends up happening, though, is, your help desk, you start having to specialize at your help desk. You start to specialize on your application team, your QA team. You have multiple build processes, and things get very, very complex very fast. So, putting everything on one platform and going with a standard platform, standard build, standard vApps, if you will, for deploying things, that will actually just, by and large, it will save you a lot of money. I mean, some companies, depending on how efficient you are, you'll save anywhere from 15 to 50%. I mean, some people probably save, up to 100%. They'll save a lot of money on just everything, not just the application, not just the licensing fees, but also just on the time and money they have to spend on resources to be able to support these environments. Okay, improving agility of IT delivery. So some customers we've talked to, they'll take 2 years to develop a new app and put it in production. Some customers will take 6 months to put a security patch into production. Those processes are really slow, and it's not always the technology. So again, sometimes it's the processes that have to be fixed, but a lot of times it's the technology that's very complex as well. So again, this is why you have a program, because it's not just about the technology, it's about everything else that's involved with updating hundreds of applications. Okay. Some people, have been, some of the people we talk to, they've been tasked with building out cloud for horizontal scalability, but also just to reduce costs and stuff. Some people have been tasked with, IT as a service, so a lot of the service-oriented architecture stuff. Okay, and then some customers, like insurance companies, banks, they don't necessarily care about the cost per se, but every minute their website's down, they lose money. And so what they want to drive Six Sigma and 5 nines. And so they need to go to a cloud platform and a middleware that is cloud ready. And so they'll go, they'll have like 4 instances of every app to make sure that these things never go down. Okay, so as part of our program, the first thing you got to do is figure out what you have. We define kind of the scope of the program, assess what's all in there, all your applications, stuff like that. There's a discovery phase. We'll design a kind of a architecture for you, based on what your goals are and what you want to do. There's a lot of different components to vFabric and vSphere, so you kind of pick and choose the ones you want and what's useful for your environment. And then you develop and deliver, and then you kind of iterate through this, and you do this for each project you have. So each application you want to migrate is its own project, but it's part of the whole, and with all the stakeholders on board. Okay. So again, assess and discover kind of stuff. For instance, for like WebLogic, in this case, WebLogic moves directly over to tcServer. Oracle Enterprise Grid Messaging, which you also see as the Oracle ESB, Oracle Messaging Server. There's like 3 or 4 names for this thing, depending on how old it is. RabbitMQ replaces that very nicely. The Oracle Web Cache I would say that Gemfire is a much better version of that. It's a fantastic product, like I said. So Gemfire replaces that, and then for the operations insights that Oracle has, you have Hyperic HQ, and then the Spring Insight or vFabric Insight. Okay, and then you kind of see a little bit up there around vFabric, the product family. Nice picture. Okay, so the Obsolescence Program, and I'm not going to read this whole thing, but it's an enterprise class migration program. So again, with this particular customer, it was around 700 apps. So you definitely need a program around there. And the reason is because when you update that many apps, most likely your QA group, your help desk, your developers, your application maintenance group, your infrastructure group, most likely they're not going to be, in a place where they can actually support, 200-300 go lives at once. So what you need to do is have a plan to work into, the environment that's already there. And so, you have to figure out what the staffing resources need to be for each team. So, do you want to outsource that? Do you want to insource that? Do you want to use like us for that? Do you want to use a partner like in India for that? I mean, how do you want to do that? So you got to figure that out, and then you got to figure out what applications to move over, what what technology you want to be migrating off of. So are you doing a full standardization, or are you just going to be migrating off, say, Oracle onto vFabric? Okay. And then again, down here you'll see some things like leveraging the exponential benefits, so leveraging virtualization, cloud, those types of things. You kind of get a multiplier effect when you do that at the same time you're doing the application migration. And it's actually very common, because cloud is a horizontal scalable type of solution, and most apps are usually written for vertical scalability. It's actually very, very common for people to do the cloud migrations, IT as a service migrations, at the same time they're doing these web obsolescence programs. Okay, so from our side, the key roles that we typically have are probably 3 roles, typically filled by 2 people. So typically you have a technical architect, who is the kind of, the one that's super experienced with vFabric, vSphere. Typically they're going to be experienced in WebLogic, so very experienced people. There's going to be a program manager / project manager. Now again, sometimes the customers have the program managers, sometimes the customers have the project managers, but typically there always has to be a program manager from our side, since we're the ones with the experience migrating, hundreds of apps. And then there's usually a migration lead, which is the overall, program manager type of thing. So it's the lead, which may, most likely works with the program manager and project managers on the customer side. Okay, but you'll see kind of some of the stuff that they do there, right? So managing the workflow across the teams. So again, the teams aren't necessarily meaning the application teams, because the technical side of this, while difficult in the sense that it can be time consuming, especially with older apps, EJB2, iPlanet, if you're migrating from that to the old CGI stuff, that can definitely be time consuming. However, all that work's been done. We've done it, lots of times, and so there's a lot of automated tools that we've developed for some dependency stuff and for migrating some of this stuff. But the real hard part is the workflow among all the different teams to make sure these things can get into production without being held up at any one point. Okay. One of the key things you have to do when you're doing a program like this is you have a standard operating procedure. You have standard operating dashboards, most likely. You probably have some business intelligence that's giving you reports and stuff like that. Need to make sure that any kind of program like this is integrated with that process, so that you can actually tell real time what the impact of this program is, and then you can tell where it's at, right? How many migrations are you completing a month? How many are you retiring a month? What is the average, median, start to finish cycle time for these migrations, and are we getting better, right? So when you start the obsolescence program, you're going to be slower because you're trying to, you got to do the application inventory, you got to figure out what you got. Sometimes you're doing the hardest apps first. You don't necessarily have all the tooling to migrate everything over automatically, but by the time you get closer to the end of the program, you're going to be able to doing, 3 times as much work with half the people, right? And you basically want to track that month over month to make sure that you're moving in that direction. Environment to environment cycle time. So, especially if you're going cloud, if you're going virtualization or something, you're going to be switching environments every time you do this. So you need to understand what that time is because that's dependent on your infrastructure group. So there's going to be a capacity issue there, unless you staff up for that. First time right. So typically when we do these, we try to make it so that you have a 90% or higher rate of success. Basically, the more you try to do at first, the less likely you're going to be successful. Trying to take, like for instance, if you have 500 apps and they're trying to do that in 1 year, would probably end up in a pretty high failure rate. It's usually too much for most IT environments to be able to take at once. It's also very costly to do that. So between cost and just failure rate, it's typically advised that, this is a multi-year program. Typically 3 to 5 years is what most people go with, depending on how large the environment is. And then you want the ratio of obsolete applications to the total fleet. So again, when you're, well, maybe not again, but when you're doing this type of program, IT still has to move forward, right? There's still security fixes for applications. There's still, you're still adding features to applications. Your infrastructure is being moved around while you do this. Even if don't have a virtualization plan or something, or even if you've done most of your virtualization, there's still stuff that moves around. It's just the way things work, right? You might be releasing like new mobile applications, for instance, and you're not really sure, what kind of traffic you're going to get from that, or what kind of load your system's going to get. And people may, especially if it's something core to your business, like if you're a big e-retailer or something, the mobile app may be a huge portion of your business. And that just may the migration program may not be the highest priority if you got core business things going on. So you just need to make sure that we manage, all of those factors in to make sure this thing is successful. So basically, if you look at the two resources we talked about, the migration lead, the architect, PM type stuff, you'll see the green and blue kind of match to those guys. And this is just an example of the different phases and execution of these things, and both from the infrastructure side, the technology platform, and then the program management side. Okay, and then the migration flow. So pretty much all of our migrations flow like this. So no matter what your environment is, no matter what stakeholders you have, no matter what technology you choose, you're always going to have some goal in the assessment stage. You're always going to do an application inventory, and you're always going to figure out what platforms you want to migrate. Okay, you're going to figure out what your resource plan is. You're going to do an app rationalization, and that means finding out details about those apps, and then for each app doing a kind of a project plan to kind of figure out how long you're going to, you think it'll take, what the budget is for that particular app, and what things you need to change in that app. So again, a lot of times when people do these app migrations, they will take the time to actually upgrade technology as well. Not only just vFabric stuff, but they may move to a different UI, right? They may make something more HTML5 based or rich web based than it used to be, just to support mobile apps and stuff. So typically what we try to do is, most customers have an application refresh type process already, where every year maybe they update 100 apps. What we would like to do is work in that environment. So you're updating the apps, you're refreshing the apps, security patches, features, stuff like that, but you're also migrating them to the new platform at the same time. The nice thing about that is it's already part of your processes, and all we're doing is just adding things. Now that adds a little bit of risk, but again, if you staff it properly, if you plan it properly, then it actually is a less of an impact to your environment than it could be. You need to understand infrastructure capacity planning. Again, some of these apps that we've done is, if you're removing apps, you can actually remove infrastructure. If you're going to be adding things like mobile support for some of these apps, you may need to add infrastructure to be able to support the extra traffic and stuff you're going to see. Okay, and then there needs to be a portfolio. So you're going to have a portfolio of apps, and there might be multiple portfolio of apps depending on how you want to do things. Again, if you're going to a service-oriented architecture, you may want to group the apps into multiple portfolios based on the types of services and types of business you do and importance to the business. Okay, there needs to be a communication plan, because again, and I have a sheet that has like the common stakeholders, and it's a lot. So we need to make sure that we communicate properly to the entire organization that is involved and all the stakeholders. I mean, this is standard project management stuff, right? And just to make sure that everybody understands what needs to happen. Okay, and then we launch the program. So here's some of the. So the next couple of slides show you some of the materials and some examples of the stuff that we go through with our customers. Okay, so again, we talk about things like, what is the performance criteria? Is the DB schema changing? Is the database changing underneath us? For instance, like a lot of people who want to migrate from Oracle Weblogic want to migrate from Oracle to Database 2. Or, you might want to migrate from DB2. Whatever it is you're migrating from and to, you need to understand that per application, what you're going to do and how that's going to work. Okay. We have things like compliance security drivers. So again, different applications deal with different data, which means that they'll have different security requirements. And that's going to affect your networking. That's going to affect a bunch of different stuff. And it's going to affect how we do things in vSphere and vFabric as well. DR requirements, for instance. Some of the other things that you might want to work out is, is this application in multiple geos? Is it in multiple data centers? What kind of DR? Not only like, how long can something be down, but can it be down at all, ever? Do you shard your data like is the data sharded based on locale or based on something like that? A lot of older applications, data sharding didn't exist, whereas nowadays data sharding is pretty common to store the data where it belongs. So data that's, European in nature stays in Europe. And then using Gemfire or something, you can pull it out of that database and pull it into the cache so you can access it in applications in other regions, except for the fact that the master storage is there. Okay. JVM versions, the extranet requirements, stuff like that is all stuff you need to understand for each application. And then we do a ranking. Once we've done that with all the applications, then we can rank things and execute the program in the manner in which you want. So a lot of times it's based on the business priority. Sometimes it's based on hardest to easiest. Sometimes it's based on easiest to hardest. So or something in between. The migration assessment checklist. Okay, so this is just all the checklists for doing the migrations. So for instance, like for the app, do we have access to the source code? Do we have access to the environment? So for instance, the source code, if a third party developed it, you may not have access to the source code, which will make it much, much harder, obviously. What is the OS, JDK, all these different requirements for these things, required integrations, right, third-party integrations. What are those requirements? Because as we do things, for instance, you might be upgrading the operating system at the same time you're upgrading the application. And so we need to understand all those different conditions that will happen. And then you'll see, based on all this, the checklist and the app rationalization, you'll end up getting, what are the goals, the scope, the assumptions, the risk, the proposed physical design, all that kind of stuff will be delivered out of this assessment process. This is actually really important. So those of you who are, project manager type people, you'll understand what rate C charts are. This basically just says who's responsible, who's accountable, who should you consult and get support for the responsible, and then who needs to be informed. So this basically lists off, all the different, kinds of different groups. It doesn't list off all, this is just an example, so it doesn't list off everything, but it lists off a lot of the different groups and stuff that you need to, make sure you understand exactly who's responsible for each and everything. And then as you go through the project plan, you definitely, based on where something's at in the project plan, you know exactly who should have it, and you can make sure to work with that person or that group directly. And then just obsolescence in general. So, so there's prioritization, scheduling strategy. You have to assess the prioritization drivers, rank the applications, group the applications. So if you're doing SOA, you group the applications no matter what, but there are going to be other drivers around grouping. Infrastructure dependencies, are they core to the business? Are they public facing, internal facing, that type of stuff. And then at the end of all of this stuff, we do a resource plan for you as well to make sure so that you know exactly to hit the goals, to do what we need to do. Here's going to be your resource plan. Here's going to be your cost per year, or estimated cost, I should say. And then basically then we come up with a ramp-up onboarding plan. Now back to our vFabric bootcamp. That is one of the main reasons for having that bootcamp. Not only can we ramp up our internal resources for projects that we do, but we can also help you guys ramp up your resources. We can ramp up other partner resources, whatever we need to do to accomplish the project and the program. Okay, so this is just some of the key deliverables and stuff around an application. So there's a migration process design. There's going to be target environment development. So typically we develop those target environments and architectures first. before we go migrating anything over to those things. We'll execute the migration program, okay, and then we'll do the program management around the obsolescence program. So some of the risk around doing this. So, you know, you've seen a lot of the benefits, but there's also risk when you go and do something like this. So application platform compatibility. So if you're going from .NET to Java, you know, or worse, you're going from C++ or C to Java, it's new, right? I mean, you're almost doing a rewrite at that point. And in fact, you are doing a rewrite if you do it right. So you got to understand those things. The bigger issues with this one is usually if you're going from like an old iPlanet to the newest Apache, it's just going to be different. I mean, it's completely different than something that was 15 years old, you know. So you just need to understand those things, and you know, stuff's going to have to happen. Those are risks, and if it happens too much, it'll basically kind of kill our timeline. So we need to understand those things so we can plan accordingly. App support resource availability. So again, there's competing priorities in an IT shop. Need to fully understand what those priorities are for each given year so that we can plan appropriately and resource appropriately. If you're doing other application enhancements, again, like we suggest if you're doing application refresh every year and you do all this stuff, you're going to be doing enhancements at the same time. You need to figure out if you want to do that with the same group that does the migration, does the enhancements. We could do, you know, you can even augment the migration group with people who are application experts. You need to, or do you want to do it with two separate teams? And if so, obviously there's going to be some QA, build, and testing, and performance testing and security type needs there to be able to support two different teams working on the same app. If you're doing a cloud or IT as a service type of infrastructure change as well, that'll have to be planned for and understood. The new procurement, you know, procurement can be easy with the cloud because you just, you know, request 5 instances and you set it up as a VApp and you're done. However, you need to definitely understand what capacity, you know, your stuff has and what do you need to do to make sure the thing gets in production. Which again is easy for one app, but you know, if you're doing hundreds, it becomes a little bit harder. Okay, so third-party apps, you need to also understand how to migrate those and what that means. Okay, and then app owner buy-in to the migration initiative. So each stakeholder, so each of the business units need to understand this as well. One of the other things I'll add to this is some IT environments, you know, they handle so many projects per year. So let's say you handle 150, you're going to do 75 with your core group. You're going to outsource 75 to, you know, consultants. That's very common for us to work with IT groups like that. But sometimes the business groups, you know, they have 200 things, and so there's, you know, 50 things a year that because they need them, they go outside of IT to go get the work done. So I've run into environments, and I've worked in a lot of environments where, you know, the IT group may manage 200, 300, 400, 500 apps, but the business groups actually manage a couple hundred apps themselves. So you need to understand if you're going to migrate those business apps at the same time. So this is where the application factory idea comes in, right? Where you have a group that just, they produce apps, they update apps, and they take these business-owned apps and they quote-unquote productionize them. So they send them through standard QA, they send them through standard security, and standard build process, all of that stuff, you know, automated QA, all of those tooling and groups in your IT department. You put all those things into that, and so that's kind of application migration, but it's also kind of taking ownership and putting something through your current processes at the same time. So there's definitely risk there if you know, if you don't take it into account and don't plan for it. There's definitely going to be added risk. And then some of the minor, so you know, capacity, availability, or provisioning delays. You know, I mean, just, you know, you got to plan for these things months in advance, hopefully, and make sure that you have all the hardware stuff you need, and then all the capacity with the different groups. So this is, again, why you need a program to be able to manage all these different stakeholders. Okay, number of stakeholder phase gates. So, you know, the more people you have to get to approve a specific app, the longer things are going to take, just by nature, right? You know, people go on vacation, people do things. I've seen, you know, if you try to do something in December in some environments, it just ain't going to happen. You know, they'll shut down the shop. So you just need to understand what those are and, again, plan accordingly. And part of your communication plan needs to be for that as well. And then, as always, anybody who manages people understands that, you know, team turnover, team training, ramping up new people, these are all, you know, risks that you're taking on. So you just need to make sure you manage those things appropriately, and that we manage the team appropriately, and that we have good, strong project managers that understand how to build teams and understand, you know, people leave, they leave, right? Sometimes they want to leave. Sometimes they have better career opportunities, whatever. But just need to make sure that, you know, when you're ramping up a large team and you're going to do these migrations, that you know, we understand where everybody's at, you know, how long they're going to be there, stuff like that. And if, you know, if there is an issue with somebody wanting to leave, then that's fine. Then we just need to be able to replace that person. And then the appendix. So these are just some sample questions that we do. We actually have a Word doc that's much better prepared and formatted. But just some examples. So like the stakeholders. So I list off a lot of stakeholders that we commonly run into, but sometimes in different, you know, in different IT organizations, there are other stakeholders that we need to be aware of, and sometimes we can remove some of these stakeholders as well. But you can see that if you're migrating hundreds of apps and you get all these stakeholders, it can be very complex, and this is why, you know, using a company like ours to run a program like this is very important, just because, you know, you need that program support to be able to manage it across all these different stakeholders. Okay. Some of the questions, you know, how many applications do you have? How many do you want to move? What, you know, target environments? You know, do you have a standard stack in mind? Do you have a standard stack today? Or are you moving from multiple stacks into this one? What versions of those stacks do you have? Stuff like that. Okay, do you virtualize desktops? Are you gonna virtualize desktops? That could definitely, you know, sometimes a lot of these apps have fat clients, whether written in Java or something else, .NET, whatever. You know, you want to make that a thin client, especially if you're virtualizing and everything. You know, do you want to make that a thin client, a web-based app? Do you want to make it a mobile app? You just need to understand all these things. Do you have a cloud strategy, for instance? You know, Oracle. So Oracle's got a lot more components than just WebLogic. Which ones are you really trying to migrate? Do you want to migrate more, less? Right. So there's, I mean, Oracle has, you know, hundreds of apps, so I'm not listing everything here. But, you know, like Oracle Portal, for instance. Do you want to move to something else? You know, there's several open source portals, for instance, that you could use. Or do you just want to go with like a Spring MVC type of model, right? Spring Rich Web and not even do the portal thing. But again, I mean, again, you can do the Spring Rich Web thing in a portal as well. So it just depends on what you want to do. But anyway, we have the questionnaire to walk you through all these things. And then from this, and then there's some architecture questions as well. Okay. And then so from this, we actually then put together a spreadsheet, put together a ramp-up plan, you know, set the project goals, and then set up all the pricing and stuff, and then work through with the customer, you know, how we're actually going to, you know, that spreadsheet something we share, and then we kind of work through how many resources we need, what the plan is, what the goals are, and how we're going to accomplish this thing based on all these questions being answered. Okay, so I think now Kevin's going to open it up to questions. If you, again, you can email vFabric@Constellium1 anytime, even after today. If you have any questions or you want to get a hold of us or talk to somebody in sales around vFabric or VMware specifically, you can follow us on Twitter. So C1, we can do that. And then, you know, there's a Constellium1 group on LinkedIn that you can join. And then we're also on Facebook if you want to like us. So Kevin, I'll hand it over to you for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll unmute all the phones here, and then you know, I'll let the people on the lines here jump in if they have a question already, or if not, I have a few that we've received on the email box. So I'll just go ahead and unmute everybody, and anyone feel free to jump in with your question. Alrighty, well, I'll field some from the email then. Mark, can you just talk a little bit about kind of how long it takes to complete these types of migrations?
Yeah, so typically doing a single app can take anywhere from, you know, 2 months to a year, depending on how complex that app is, and if it's you know, kind of a global app, and depending on how important it is to the business. So if it's a critical tier 1 app that the business runs on, obviously you're going to want to go a little bit slower and make sure you've done everything right, and you know. But that's not really specific to a migration. That's specific to any kind of changes you make to an app like that. So we've migrated apps within a month, right? The technical side of it's actually pretty easy if you're just mapping. You know, if you're doing like an EJB app to Spring, it's actually pretty easy. You actually remove all the EJB stuff, create the beans and your data sources and stuff like that, and you're done. You know, Tomcat is kind of the de facto servlet container out there. So, you know, pretty much everything works on it. You know, just the only thing you have to worry about really there is like if you have a bunch of like weird JSF libraries or something, just need to make sure those dependencies are met.
Sure, thanks. We got another one here. Can you talk a little bit? It seems like everyone's got kind of a cloud initiative, or they're in the process of building a cloud initiative. So can you talk a little bit about how a program like this can impact a cloud initiative moving forward?
Well, so I think if you have a cloud initiative, you kind of want a program like this, right? Because like I said before, if you have vertically built apps that, you know, kind of hit a database, they're multi-tier, and then you're using something like, say, if you're using Oracle, in this instance, you're using like Golden Gate or something to replicate data. You know, it might behoove you to you know, kind of make sure your apps can scale horizontally. So using things like EM4J to cluster the heap across virtual instances. Using something like Gemfire so that you have a global cache where all your applications can do something. Using stuff like you know, RabbitMQ to send messages across apps, you know, whether they're across data centers or across the globe. Those types of horizontally scalable things and architectures are very useful. And when you're doing a migration like this, a lot of times you want to rewrite components of your applications to take advantage of the newer technology and to take advantage of that you know, cloud at its core is some manageability around quota management, chargeback, stuff like that. But it's also elastic compute, right? So be able to spin up boxes, spin them down automatically, you know, where you don't have to get your infrastructure team involved. You just let vCloud Director or comparable tools kind of do that for you. It's very useful and saves on not only people's time, but also allows it so that if you have like retail apps and stuff, you know, the infrastructure itself can handle that based on the rules you tell it to follow. So like with vCloud Director, you can say, you know, when CPU threshold or memory threshold, depending on what, you know, what your app is thresholded by, you can say if it hits 70% CPU, for instance, spin up 3 new instances, right? You could say during these hours of the day, I want to spin up 10 instances, but at night, I'm going to spin down instances so my Spring Batch stuff can run all its batch programs at night and have more resources available to it. So you can do all those types of things as long as your app's written to do that. So for instance, if you have an app that has an internal caching system and it does everything in its own cache and then it communicates, you know, like EH caching, it uses the EH cache communication between the servers, well, that type of application is going to be, you know, it's going to be throttled by itself. It's not going to be able to use any of these horizontal caches like Gemfire or something. If you're using like a Memcache, you know, Memcache is a great product. It allows things like Wikipedia to scale, but on the other hand, you know, they're single servers and you got to cluster them and stuff like that. Whereas something like a Gemfire is really truly an internet scalable type of system, right?
Sure, thanks. I think the next question is really a little bit more pertinent to the case study we discussed. Obviously, that was a large-scale migration. So a attendee is asking, how would the program differ if it were 2 or 3 applications rather than hundreds?
So I think there's a threshold where it's no longer called a program and you just have individual projects and then you run them one by one. So typically when we do like 2, 3, 4, probably below 5, we don't really call it a program. We do the exact same thing, but we just do them individually for each app, and then move them over. Again, if the apps aren't big, you know, the evaluation period takes a couple days, and then you've migrated within a month or 2, and then you're in production after that. So in those cases, you just follow the kind of same guidelines, same steps, same experience that we have, but you don't really need the whole program management component of it. You have a lot fewer stakeholders and stuff like that, and your current capacity for QA and stuff is probably fine to meet that. In the case of, you know, 10 to 100 or something, you're probably still talking about a program. It's just going to be, you know, it's probably not going to be a multi-year program. It's, you know, it's just going to be a program that lasts a year or maybe a year and a half or something.
Okay, we just got another question in from Chris. Can Consilium One migrate shadow applications to the cloud?
Migrate what application? Sorry.
It says shadow applications.
Shadow applications?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know what that, what is it, is Chris on the line? Can he actually specify what a shadow application is?
Chris, if you're on, if you could speak up, it appears that he's on the, he's listening to the audio broadcast on his computer, so I'm not sure if he has his mic turned on.
Okay.
Chris, we can follow up with you offline on this, and we'll get a little more clarification and move forward with that one. So just getting back to some of the other questions, you mentioned that you talked a little bit about the training services that we provide. Can you talk a little bit more detail about, you know, kind of how we approach those, what types of class sizes we can handle, how long the trainings generally run, how do people engage with us to try to do these trainings?
Yeah, sure. So we do it two ways. One, you can sign up at VMware for the training, but if you want to hit us directly, we can do training on behalf of VMware. So typically the classes run two, 3, and 4 days for the specific topic. So like tcServer, I think, is 3 days. Tomcat is 4 days specifically. No, sorry, tcServer is 2 days. Tomcat's 4. Spring Core is 4. Spring Integration is 4. So a lot of these are 4. So the boot camp really goes through the entire vFabric stack of training available, and that's typically about 8 weeks. And then has a practical at the end where they have to do a project, a real-world project to make sure they understand. You know, not only do they do the written test and all that stuff, but that they actually can do this thing in real life on a real, you know, VM instance.
Okay, thank you. We've got a little bit more of a general kind of opinion question here. How can the IT side of the house kind of sell this program to the business side and vice versa? How could, you know, if the business side of the corporation was interested in selling this back to the IT side, can you just talk a little bit about how you know, how to position that properly for them and kind of some of the benefits they can gain from that?
So yeah, so it depends on which piece you're talking about. Obviously, if you want to say go cloud, there's usually 2 ways people can approach that. So getting your IT group to go cloud typically means you have to talk your CIO into having a cloud initiative, right? And then you know, you have to prove the cost savings. I think that's actually pretty easy to do. That's actually what VMware is good at, right? The whole, you know, virtualization, and the next step is cloud after virtualization. So I mean, for instance, this particular customer that we're talking about, I think they had 3 data centers and they closed down 1 because of the virtualization aspect of it, right? So you know, they don't necessarily save a lot of money on hardware per se because they had already bought it. And then when you virtualize, typically you buy bigger hardware, right? So you lose money there, and then you have a lot of storage for all your VM instances and stuff. But you know, you save on all the, you know, heating, cooling, lighting, and all that stuff, and the real estate for the buildings. So that definitely makes things a lot easier. On the vFabric side, that's a little bit easier because, you know, typically IT departments have multiple development environments, and you know, it's usually a mixed. It's not a homogeneous environment. It's usually a heterogeneous environment. And you know, talking them into, again, most of the guys will probably know Spring already. It's rare that you run into a Java program that doesn't know Spring. So typically, it's a much easier conversation when you say, okay, there's Spring, but now there's all these other things. So for example, one of the top middleware vendors out there, internally in their IT group, they use Spring. They don't use their own stuff. And you can figure out which vendor that is, but it's actually pretty funny. It's just because Spring is a really good tool, and it kind of is it's becoming the standard very, very fast for middleware development on Java.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I think that's about all that we've got in right now. Again, for those people still on the line, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to do so.
So hey, Kevin, or on the shadow one, I'm wondering if they're talking about like shadow applications in the sense of applications that have been built, put into production, but they have not gone through the standard approval process. So that was one thing. I mean, that's the only thing I understand with shadow IT and shadow applications. There might be some stuff around testing and stuff where they call it shadow. But if that's the case, then that was definitely something I mentioned during my talk, where, you know, taking applications owned by the business or owned by or you know, developed in-house, to get around the current IT processes because somebody felt they needed it so bad that they wanted to go around the processes. That's definitely something that should be done, right? So as part of the program, we can definitely do that. And if you want to go cloud, obviously you can go your own cloud. You can go to a different cloud. We have the government cloud stuff that we did. So there's definitely options there to kind of take these things, own them, even if your current infrastructure can't handle them. We can definitely help customers, kind of take ownership of those applications so that, they don't have security risks, so that they have, a lot of the SOX compliance stuff. I mean, who knows how many people are out of SOX compliance because of shadow applications, right? So it's definitely a good idea to take control and ownership of those things, and we can definitely help customers and IT shops do that. Hopefully that answers Chris's question.
Yeah, hopefully. So, all right. Well, then I think we'll leave it there, and we'll conclude this presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We will be following up with an email that has a link to this webinar presentation if you'd like to review it again. And in the meantime, if you have any further questions or want more information, feel free to contact us at vFabric@consilium1.com. So with that, I'd like to just thank you, and we'll end this call here. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kevin.